Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about Harlequin Shadowseers in 10th edition and why they kind of suck. And this is really disappointing because Shadowseers are one of my favorite units. I loved running Shadowseers all the way back from 4th edition when I started running Harlequins in my army. And basically, Shadowseers historically have been a unit that has been very good at preventing enemies from shooting at the unit that they join with. And they were pretty much like that in 9th edition. Shadowseers could cast a lot of cool abilities that could either make the unit harder to hit or just basically untargetable within a certain range. And in 10th edition, this has been replaced with an ability that is just not as good in any way, shape, or form. So what we're going to do in this video is hopefully shed some light on what the Shadowseer does, what the Shadowseer is good at doing, which is not the same thing as it was good at doing in 9th edition, and maybe talk about some ways in which we can use it. But, viewer beware, Shadowseers are nowhere close to as good as they were in 9th edition, just flat out. Unlike with other Harlequin units where there were certain trade-offs that you can kind of compare and contrast, with Shadowseers it just seems like it's all downhill. And that's really unfortunate because I really do love the model, and I do love the lore behind the Shadowseers. So first, before we get into the video, let's go ahead and look at what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the stats, weapons, and special rules of the Shadowseer, their strengths and weaknesses, combos and synergies, and the role Shadowseers play in an Eldar army, and how to make the most out of them. So looking at their base stats, it's pretty average for Harlequins. Nothing stands out as great, but then again, nothing is terrible. Has movement 8, which is the same as all Harlequin units, and has a 4+ invul save, which is what you can expect from these types of units in general. As far as their ranged weapons go, you will notice something is lacking here, and that is namely the fact that they can only take a neuro disruptor, and they have no psychic shooting attack. So last edition, they had an ability called Mirror of the Minds, which was like a psychic shooting attack. If the Shadowseer got Mirror of the Minds, I think it would be probably a pretty good model, but we don't have it. The Shadowseer, in fact, lacks any type of ranged psychic ability, which is really a shame because I think Harlequin psychic powers were one of the coolest in the Codex last edition, and it seems like we've just lost all of them. Not only that, but the hallucination grenade launcher has been removed and has just been replaced with the grenades keyword, which we'll talk about a little later. So that's unfortunate. Basically, the only ranged options the Shadowseer has is the Neuro Disruptor, which is just a slightly better shuriken pistol, nothing special there. The Shadowseer also comes with a Mist Stave, which is a decent weapon. It's strength 5, AP -1, and D3 damage, so it's nothing terrible. It's pretty good. It'll do decent damage against Marines and things like that. It has a good amount of attacks, but it's fairly lackluster for a character. Especially a Harlequin character, which is typically going to be better in close combat than other Psychers. So yes, it is better than a Farseer, but at the same time, it's still not really that great. As for her ability, she does give her unit stealth, which is a -1 to hit against range attacks. Now, the problem with this is that most of the time, if you have a Harlequin troop with a Shadowseer in it, and if they're ever caught out in the open, they're pretty much dead regardless. They're very squishy. 4+ invul save isn't going to help them against hardcore anti-infantry fire. And while -1 to hit does help them a little bit, it doesn't help them by much. So any serious dedicated firepower will wipe these guys out pretty easily, stealth or no stealth. The next ability she has is called Twilight Pathways. Basically, the unit she joins can reroll advance rolls as well as advance and charge, and it gives the unit a good threat range at the cost of damage. And the reason why I say this costs some damage is because normally you'd have a troop master in the unit and it would be, granting them devastating wounds, which is a serious damage buff. So you are trading that out for the ability to advance and charge. And unfortunately in this edition, Harlequins just don't hit as hard as they used to, which means they kind of do need those devastating wounds to make them a competent melee unit. Without that, you're much better off going with a different type of combat unit, right? So, if they don't have that extra damage, you might as well pick up Howling Banshees because Howling Banshees have more AP and they have better damage per point than Harlequins do. As far as the war gear options go, you can take a Neuro Disruptor, and that's it. Can't even take a Fusion Pistol, just the Neuro Disruptor. The Shadowseer costs 60 points as well, So it's not even just a really cheap unit. I mean, I could see this thing being 30 points and, just someone saying, well, for 30 points, it's a really good price. It's really efficient for 30 points, so I'll throw it in a unit. It's 60 points. That means it's more expensive than the Troopmaster. And arguably, it does a lot less for the unit. Harlequins already move very fast. They don't really need advance and charge. I mean, it's good to have, but if they're in a transport, they can get out 3, which gives them basically an additional 3 inches. They can move 8, and they can charge 2d6, which should be enough in most cases if you've positioned your Harlequins correctly. And don't get me wrong, although advance and charge is a powerful ability, there are better and more efficient units in our codex that do the same thing. So unfortunately, 60 points just seems really expensive for what the Shadowseer does. And the really unfortunate thing is that for 60 points, you would think that they would give this Shadowseer some sort of ranged psychic power, right? A mirror of the minds kind of thing or something like that. But they didn't, and I think they completely missed the mark here when writing the rules for the Shadowseer. And I really do. I think this is one of the most disappointing units in the entire index. As for her keywords, she has the infantry and grenades keyword. Again, she lost the hallucination grenade launcher, which sucks, right? The hallucination grenade launcher was a really cool piece of kit that I wish she had kept in some way, either as a ranged attack or something like that, but she lost it. And by the way, Dark Eldar lost their version of it too, and I get it, GW is trying to simplify the rules, but it just really sucks to have these unique pieces of war gear relegated to a keyword, which is pretty much shared by every unit in the game. And again, I have no problem with that being, the case with Guardians or being the case with just regular troops, which by the way also have the grenades keyword. That makes sense, right? They're all infantry, they all carry grenades. But if you have a special piece of war gear that launches grenades that causes fear in the enemy, I think that's cool enough to deserve its own profile. So unfortunately, we're not going to get that this edition. Now, it also has the Psyker keyword, and, it is a Psyker, but this just makes the unit weaker. This makes the unit weaker against weapons that have anti-Psyker. So it's really not a buff, it's really just a debuff to your own unit against those types of attacks. Okay, so as for the Shadowseer's strengths and weaknesses, the strengths are, of course, the Shadowseer gives the troop she joins extra threat range. So on average with the reroll, you're looking at about maybe a 4.5 on average longer threat distance, which is nothing to scoff at. I mean, that's really good and everything. It's just not super good, right? Again, if your positioning is correct, you shouldn't really need it, especially with fate dice. You should be getting that charge fairly easily in most cases. And if the unit is out of your threat range and you can't quite get the charge, you have other units that can deal with it. Things like the Solitaire. Solitaire has a very high threat range and can easily reach those things. So Shadowseer, probably not really needed in most cases. It also makes them harder to hit at range, which is okay. But again, unless you're running a big beefy squad of them, which you won't be with the Shadowseer, that's not really what it's good at, then being harder to hit at range isn't really that great, especially since they're going to be in a transport or in reserve anyway. You're most likely not going to be able to use this ability until, simply put, they've already done their job and are probably going to die. As for the weaknesses, there are a lot of them. Basically, the main one is it just does nothing to increase the unit's damage. As a result, the unit's not going to hit that hard. Pure and simple, right? The Shadowseer's unit is just not going to do enough damage to make a serious impact against most targets that are a little bit on the heavier side. Yeah, against the lighter targets, it'll be fine, but against those heavier targets, it won't be that great. And again, no psychic shooting attack, which really sucks because this thing used to have cool shooting abilities from their psychic powers and stuff like that. Farseers got Eldritch Storm, Eldrad got Mind War. Shit, even Warlocks got Destructor, right? I mean, even the Wraith Seer got a fucking ranged psychic power. Excuse my language. But seriously, where's the ranged psychic power on the Shadowseer? It's nowhere to be found. You don't have one. Lastly, if any serious range damage target her unit, stealth is just not going to help. It's not really a great ability. Doesn't help in close combat either. It's just not good, pure and simple. The greatest challenge to this unit is Overwatch, and stealth doesn't affect Overwatch really whatsoever unless your opponent is getting some sort of bonus to hit when they Overwatch. So in most cases, you're just not going to be able to, have this ability help you in any way, shape, or form. And also, like I said before, stealth doesn't help you if you're in a transport, which in most cases, yes, this unit will be coming out of a transport. Okay, so at this point you might be asking, well, Proxy Hammer, there must be something you can do with the Shadowseer to make it useful. There must be some sort of combo or synergy that allows this Shadowseer to be more effective. And honestly, the truth is that there's not much in the index that synergizes with a Shadowseer Enter unit. She doesn't buff its damage, so Falcons don't really help do anything. I mean, rerolls to wound is good, but it's not going to be as powerful as a Troop Master. And, using Matchless Agility or Fate Dice to boost an advance roll to a 6 is a decent tactic. But again, those are resources that you need to spend, right? That's a Fate Dice you need to spend. That is a command point. And at that point, Banshees can boast the same, right? Howling Banshees can do the exact same thing for a much cheaper cost. Harlequins cost 75 points for 5 models. You add the Shadowseer on there, and you have a unit that's costing over 100 points. On the other hand, Howling Banshees are better damage for their points. They are only 85 points for 5, which is still kind of expensive, but you're also getting the same invul save in close combat because Howling Banshees do get a 4+ invul save in close combat. So you're not getting the -1 to hit, but who cares? Because most of the damage is going to come from Overwatch, and once that unit is in combat and wipes their target out, it's not going to matter anyway. Because they're 1 wound, toughness 3 models. So they're going to die regardless. A -1 to hit isn't really going to help that much with that. Okay, so moving on from that though, because that's just a little bit of a rant I have with the Shadowseer and how the Shadowseer interacts with a Harlequin troop. What is the role of a Shadowseer in an Eldar army, and how do you make the most out of them? So there is a way to use these guys. It's just not great, right? Because we do have other tools that are just better. So Shadowseers, what they do is they're basically a threat range booster to their unit that can increase the distance in which your opponent's units will be attacked. And although they make the unit slightly more durable with stealth, it's nowhere close to enough to protect them from serious shooting, so they still need transports to protect them. And it's also just not good in combat, right? Stealth doesn't do anything for them in close combat. So I believe the best way to use these guys is just straight out of your deployment zone to take out enemy infiltrators or enemy scouts. So because you have that greater threat range, you're more easily able to get into combat with the lighter elements of your opponent's army that wants to advance on objectives early on in the game. Basically, it's the same thing I've been using Howling Banshees for this edition, which is to clear out light infantry from objectives in the midboard when your opponent infiltrates them up the battlefield or scouts them up the battlefield. Kind of like a counterattacker to those units. So I think that a Shadowseer with a troop performs the same exact role. Unfortunately, though, at a higher cost. So unless you're going all Harlequin, there's really no point in choosing a Shadowseer and a troop over just a regular unit of Howling Banshees because they essentially do the same thing. And if I may say so, I think Howling Banshees do it a little bit better. So the question becomes, should I even run a Shadowseer with my troop at all? And I would say that unless you're running a dedicated Harlequin list, the answer is no. Because there are other units like Howling Banshees who can do the same job, but better, and you're just paying more points for it if you choose to have a Shadowseer with a troop. However, if you are running a pure Harlequins list like I have chosen to do over the last week, which by the way, my second game was earlier today, and it went better. Went a lot better than my, Chaos Knight game, but in full disclosure, it was Death Guard. And I managed to kind of get a game with my buddy who plays Death Guard because he knew that Harlequins were not as good as last edition, and he thought he may have a chance against them. And he was a little bit wrong and very disappointed to know that, no, in fact, Death Guard are still worse, unfortunately. So if you are running an all Harlequin list, a Shadowseer with a troop can be effective if you need something to slingshot across the battlefield quickly and engage lighter targets. And of course, in this game against Death Guard, I didn't have any lighter targets because basically all he was running was Plague Marines. So the Shadowseers units did very little for me and ended up bouncing a lot of the times, especially against, toughness 5, toughness 6 stuff where I'm wounding on 5+. It was really difficult to actually get any damage in with these troops. And I ended up, again, having to rely a lot on the Death Jester, the Solitaire, and of course the Skyweavers and Void Reavers that I had in my list. So the troop with the Shadowseer is definitely not a hard-hitting unit, and even against lighter targets, I think they would struggle a lot. Even just your basic Space Marines, I think they would struggle to kill their points worth in any given turn. Alright, so in conclusion, sadly Shadowseers are pretty lackluster at the moment and will probably remain on your shelf and in the shadows until the Codex comes out for us, which might be a while. You'll probably be waiting over a year for that Codex to come out and Harlequins to be revamped. And I can understand the pain from a lot of Harlequin players, and I can understand why a lot of Harlequin players are not really playing Harlequins at this moment. I have to say, as an army, you can win with them, you can have fun with them, but they're not super competitive, and a lot of their stuff is very toned down from what it was last edition. And I'm not just talking about the super OP stuff, I'm also talking about the little clever tricks you can pull with Harlequins last edition that you cannot pull anymore, unfortunately. And I think overall, that's what made Harlequins really good last edition, is being able to basically game your opponent in many different situations and outplay them. Unfortunately, Harlequins can't really do that anymore. They have to rely more on being fast, being hard-hitting, and sneaky. But unfortunately, they're just not as hard-hitting as they once were, so that can be a little bit tough against certain matchups. Also, just want to say it again because it's true and it needs to be stated. Giving the unit stealth is not a great survivability buff. And if you want a survivability buff for your Harlequins, it's much better to go for your Vrain, because for 40 more points, you can pick her up. She gives the unit a 5+ feel no pain and can resurrect D3 models in your command phase. She is a much better choice than a Shadowseer in almost every single way, and she does devastating wounds herself. She does a bunch of devastating wounds, so she increases the damage of the unit considerably just by being in it and being able to shoot and things like that. And again, Advance and Charge, it is useful in certain scenarios, but it is by no means worth 60 points in comparison to your other options. Troop Masters give you devastating wounds. Also make Harlequins battle line in case you do want to run a massive Harlequin contingent in your army, which is probably not recommended. But again, if you're like me and a little bit crazy, you want to run something different, you want to run pure Quins in 10th edition, you're definitely going to want to max out on Troop Masters before you even consider running a single Shadowseer. And I realize some people might come up in the comments and disagree with me and say that the Shadowseer's Advance and Charge is a really good way to get to certain parts of the battlefield earlier or hit a target that your opponent might not quite expect you to. And that's a very fair assessment. Trust me, it is. Advance and Charge is a useful ability, but we already have a unit that does this better, and it's Howling Banshees for a cheaper cost. And just think about this, put this in perspective for a second, right? A unit of Howling Banshees costs 85 points. A troop with a Shadowseer costs 135 points, which is 45 points more than the Howling Banshees. That is a considerable amount of points to pay for not a lot of extra damage or utility or basically anything else. Not even survivability, right? You're paying a lot of points for basically no benefit. So unfortunately, because of that, Shadowseers are just not going to be a great option for your army unless, again, you're like me, you're a little bit crazy and you're running a full Harlequin list and trying to fit in everything in the Harlequin section into your list. So unless you're running that, Shadowseers really just aren't worth it at all. However, they are cool models. If you do want to run them, there is a way to do it, but just don't expect them to hit that hard and only expect them to take out the lightest of targets. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Sorry I couldn't have better news about Shadowseers. I wish they were good. I really do, but they're just not. They're complete garbage, and I wish that they were a lot better, but we just have to face facts. Thank you to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last months. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you do want to become a Patreon member, I do have free trials activated so you can join for absolutely nothing. and at the same time get a free access code to my Discord community. You do have to sign up for the Patreon free trial, but you can cancel at any time at no cost to you. Our Discord community is a place where Eldar players of all types can talk about strategies, tactics, and of course hobbying with their fellow Eldar enthusiasts. And again, the link will be in the description if you do want to join. And lastly, I do have a store page for those of you interested in grabbing some Eldar-inspired apparel. I have a lot of craft world-based stuff and aspect word-based stuff, so come check it out if you get the chance. I will go ahead and put a link in the description for you guys if you do want to check that stuff out. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Peace out. See you guys next time, and have a good one with lots of fun games this weekend. See you later, everybody. Peace out.